When I was 13, I learned what it meant to be truly alone. I didn't know it at the time. At the time, I just stood there in front of the sliding glass doors of the Westfield Mall, holding a crumpled $5 bill in my hand, thinking my parents would come back. I watched people drift past, arms full of shopping bags, laughter echoing from somewhere near the food court. The sun was starting to dip behind the parking lot, casting long shadows that stretched toward me like they were trying to warn me. But I still waited. For 2 hours. Then 3. I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even sit down. I just stood there and waited. I'm Nathan. I'm 27 now, but the name still catches in my throat some days. I used to hate it. I used to think it was cursed, like everything that came with it. Nathan the problem child, Nathan the ungrateful one, Nathan the liar. But it's mine, and I've spent the last decade slowly dragging it out of the mud my parents buried it in. That day outside the mall, my dad didn't even look at me when he said it. He was behind the wheel of our beat-up minivan, one hand on the gear shift, the other gripping the steering, well, like it was the only thing keeping him from launching into space. "You're old enough," he said flatly. "Figure it out." My mom nodded like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "You've got $5. Be smart with it." And just like that, the door clicked shut. The van pulled away without so much as a glance in the rearview mirror. No bag, no phone, no explanation. Just me, the pavement under my sneakers, and a slowly spreading chill I'd later learn wasn't about the weather. It wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like that, not really. Looking back, the signs were all there. My parents were the kind of people who treated children like burdens with an expiration date. The second we could walk, we were expected to act like adults. I say we, but it was really just me. My younger sister, Daisy, was their golden child. She could throw a tantrum in the middle of church, and they'd coo over how spirited she was. Meanwhile, if I so much as spilled a glass of milk, I'd get the cold stare, the one that made me feel like a cockroach under a magnifying glass. Growing up in that house meant learning quickly when to speak and when to disappear. I don't remember ever being hugged. Not once. No bedtime stories, no school plays, no scraped knees kissed better. Just chores, silence, and long stretches of time trying to be invisible. I became good at it. By the time I was 10, I could cook a full meal, get Daisy ready for school, clean the house top to bottom, and still get blamed when Dad's coffee wasn't hot enough. There was always a reason I didn't measure up. I was too sensitive, too lazy, too dramatic. When I got sick in 4th grade and missed 2 weeks of school, my mom called me a little hypochondriac. I had pneumonia. The mall incident, though, that was the moment the invisible line I hadn't realized existed snapped for good. That night, I walked to a nearby gas station and sat on the curb until it got too cold. I ended up in the bathroom at the Greyhound station, locking myself in one of the stalls and curling up on the seat with my jacket over my knees. I cried without making a sound. It was the first night of many where I would sleep with one ear open. Eventually, a social worker got involved. A janitor found me curled up in that same stall 2 days later and called someone. They contacted my school, who pulled up my record, saw my absences, and flagged it. But my parents were good liars. They said I was acting out. Said I'd run away because I didn't want to do my homework. Said I was manipulative, always trying to get attention. And somehow, they convinced the system. After 2 months in a group home, I was returned to them with a stern warning and a counseling mandate that they never followed up on. They were smarter after that, less obvious. The next time they wanted to punish me, they just unplugged the fridge and blamed me when the food spoiled. When I tried to tell someone, they said I was making it up again. By the time I was 16, I had a part-time job under the table, cleaning at a local diner. I kept the cash hidden behind a loose tile in my closet. I spent my evenings doing homework with one eye on Daisy, who was now a preteen and treated me like the help. She had picked up our parents' habits, parroting their insults, mimicking their disdain like a mirror too young to know what it was reflecting. I left home the day I turned 18. No warning, no note. I packed the essentials, what little I had, and took a bus 3 towns over. I crashed on a coworker's couch for a few months, worked 2 jobs, and never looked back. I blocked their numbers, changed mine, cut every tie. For 9 years, I didn't hear a single word from them. No calls, no emails, nothing. It was like I'd never existed, and I was fine with that. I made a life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked my way up in a warehouse, got a cheap car, an apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, and slowly, painfully, I healed. I even started therapy, which cracked open doors I didn't even know were locked. And then, about a month ago, everything changed again. It was a Sunday. I remember because I was watching football and arguing with my roommate over wings. There was a knock on the door. No one ever knocks on our door. I opened it and found a small envelope on the ground. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. My chest went cold before I even opened it. Inside was a baby shower invitation. Soft pastel colors, a cartoon stork, the works. Join us to celebrate the arrival of baby Dawson, it said. My sister's name, Daisy, was in the RSVP line. And then, folded neatly behind it, was a small handwritten note. Nathan, we would really love to see you again. It's time to put the past behind us. Daisy is so excited to become a mother, and it would mean the world to her if you came. Family should stick together. Mom. I read it 3 times. I didn't even realize I was shaking until the paper fluttered in my hand. Family should stick together. Now they wanted me back. After all the silence, all the pain, all the nights I spent hungry and alone, they wanted me back for a party. For Daisy. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But that invitation did something to me. It cracked something open that had been sealed shut for years. I started looking into them. Quietly. I didn't want contact. Not yet. I wanted context. And what I found, well, let's just say the baby shower wasn't the only surprise they had in store. Turns out, my family hadn't changed. If anything, they'd gotten worse. And when I say worse, I mean entitled on a level that made my teenage years look like a warm-up round. That was when I decided I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. They wanted me back in their lives? Fine. But not the way they expected. Not even close. And that's when the plan began. I didn't RSVP. I didn't text, didn't call, didn't send a card. I just sat with that note for days, letting it simmer. There was something so surreal about seeing her handwriting again. Slanted and stiff, like she was forcing kindness into every loop and curve. Like she was trying to make herself seem warm and maternal on paper. The same hands that had once ripped up my school project because it wasn't presentable enough were now writing about forgiveness and fresh starts. For a while, I thought about throwing it away, shredding it, burning it, but I didn't. I tucked it into the back of my closet, behind my stack of paperwork, and kept going about my life. Except I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like someone had opened a window in a room I'd sealed off years ago, and now every draft, every gust of memory, kept creeping in. I tried to ignore it. I focused on work. I doubled my hours at the warehouse, picked up a side gig driving for a delivery app, did anything I could to keep my mind off it. But something had shifted. I wasn't just haunted by the past anymore. I was pissed. Because here's the thing. This wasn't some tearful reunion attempt. This wasn't an apology. It was a guilt trip. A manipulative, sugar-coated command dressed up as sentimentality. It wasn't about me. It was about them, about their image. About Daisy's big moment, and how they wanted to parade their picture-perfect family in front of neighbors and friends and whoever else they were trying to impress. And I knew exactly how it would go. I'd show up, people would smile and gasp and say things like, "Oh my God, Nathan, we've heard so much about you." My mother would tear up, clutch my arm, and whisper about second chances while my father stood off to the side like some grizzled martyr. Daisy would smile and thank me for coming, as if she hadn't spent most of her teenage years calling me garbage boy whenever I came home from my diner shift smelling like grease. And I would stand there, nodding, smiling, pretending like it didn't hurt. Pretending like I hadn't spent years unlearning the idea that I was disposable. But I didn't want to pretend anymore. So I started digging. It began small. Social media mostly. Daisy had a public Instagram filled with curated pastel posts. Ultrasound photos, aesthetic bump selfies, DIY nursery updates. Everything captioned with sparkly emojis and hashtags like #Mama2B and #blessed. She'd grown into the kind of influencer-light personality I could barely stand. Everything overly filtered, every sentence dripping with humble brag. But behind the captions, I saw glimpses of truth. There were photos of my parents at her baby announcement. Mom had her arms around Daisy's waist, beaming like she'd just won the lottery. Dad stood stiffly beside them. Same expression he always had, like he was doing the world a favor by being present. I clicked through comments. Friends gushing. Acquaintances congratulating. And then I saw one from someone named TessaJean92. "So happy your family is there for you, babe. Your brother better show up, or I'll riot, lol. Tessa, her best friend from high school. I remembered her. She used to glare at me like I was a stray dog whenever she came over. I kept scrolling. There were more posts. A video tour of the nursery, mint green walls, alphabet decals, and a crib that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And then, in one of the older posts, a comment from Mama Kathy official. Yes, my actual mom, complete with a cheesy family recipe profile bio. So excited to spoil this baby the way you deserve, sweetheart. You've always been our shining light. That was it. That comment. You've always been our shining light. I remember staring at those words and feeling something inside me snap. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, clean crack, like the last thread in a rope finally giving out. Because yeah, I'd always known there was favoritism. But seeing it laid out, written in digital ink for the world to see, made it feel like more than just a bad memory. It was proof. Proof that all those times they said I was imagining it, exaggerating, making myself the victim, it was all a lie. I didn't know what I was going to do with that anger yet, but I knew I wasn't letting it go. A few days later, I got another letter. This one wasn't as polite. No envelope. Just a folded note shoved into my mailbox with barely legible writing. Stop being selfish. Your sister needs you. Show up or don't bother ever coming back. No signature. But I knew that scrawl. It was my dad's. I read it 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on my apartment floor, the paper crumpling slightly in my fist, and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. Selfish. That word hit harder than I expected. It was a word I'd heard all my life. Anytime I said I was tired. Anytime I asked for help. Anytime I so much as hinted that I wasn't okay. You don't know what we sacrifice for you, Nathan. You think the world owes you something just because you had a bad day? You're selfish, always thinking about yourself. And now here it was again, like a ghost. I realized something then. This wasn't about reconciliation. It never had been. This was a performance. A carefully choreographed show where I was expected to play the prodigal son, returning just in time to be photographed beside Daisy's pastel balloon arch. I decided I needed more. More than just social media glimpses. More than passive aggression from my dad. I needed to see them, really see them. So I drove back. Not to talk. Not to knock on the door. Just to look. It had been almost a decade since I'd seen the house. I didn't even know if they still lived there. But when I pulled onto that familiar street, heart pounding, there it was. The same beige siding, the same crooked mailbox, the same cracked driveway. They'd added a wreath to the door and some tasteful garden gnomes, but it was still the same house. The house where I learned to shrink myself. I parked down the block and just watched. About 20 minutes later, the front door opened. Daisy stepped out, waddling slightly under her pregnancy weight, phone pressed to her ear. She laughed at something, gestured with her free hand, and waved as someone pulled into the driveway behind her. It was my parents. Mom got out first, carrying a bag from some baby boutique. Dad followed, slower, holding what looked like a box of diapers. They looked older, obviously, but not by much. Still put together. Still playing the part. They smiled, hugged her, kissed her forehead. And I watched it all from my car, heart thudding like a war drum. They looked happy, whole, like they hadn't left a piece of their family outside a mall a decade ago. Something about that moment burned itself into my memory. I left before they saw me. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Then the real betrayal came. It was a Wednesday night. I got home from work, checked my email, and saw a subject line that made my stomach drop. Urgent, family legal matter, estate planning. It was from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was spam, but the address checked out. I opened it, scanned the contents, and felt my vision blur. The email wasn't about someone dying. It was about someone preparing to die. My parents had drawn up a new will. And somehow, through some bizarre loophole or slip in their planning, I'd been accidentally CC'd on the document. I clicked the PDF, my hands cold. There it was. Legal, stamped, notarized. Every asset, every account, every policy, left to Daisy. All of it. With a short clause at the bottom. Our son, Nathaniel, has been estranged for many years and has made it clear he wants no relationship with this family. As such, we are leaving all inheritance and property to our daughter, Daisy. No mention of the circumstances. No mention of abandonment. Just that I was estranged. Like it was my choice. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. They weren't just trying to erase me emotionally. They were trying to erase me legally. That's when everything truly clicked. This wasn't just about pride, or dysfunction, or even favoritism. It was about legacy, image, money. They didn't want me back for forgiveness. They wanted me back to avoid questions, to make sure everything looked tidy before they handed over the keys to Daisy's future. I should have felt defeated. Instead, I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. I wasn't unsure. I was furious. And I was ready. But I knew I had to be smart. Strategic. I couldn't just storm into that baby shower and start screaming truths. That's not how people like my parents worked. They wore masks. They lived in the realm of appearances and quiet manipulation. If I wanted to expose them, I'd have to speak their language. And so I began planning. Because if they wanted me to play a part in their little show, oh, I'd play it all right. But not the way they expected. Not even close. Rock bottom doesn't always feel like a crash. Sometimes it's a silence. A quiet understanding that you've been pushed out of the picture, not in anger, but with surgical precision. Neatly, efficiently, like trimming a thread that no longer matches the fabric. That's what that will felt like. Not rage. Not revenge. Just removal. I didn't sleep the night I got that email. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling in my one-bedroom apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the other room. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was standard legal language, that maybe it didn't matter. But it did, because they'd reduced me to a footnote, a parenthetical, a disclaimer on their clean, perfect legacy. For a week, I went numb. I worked. I came home. I ate the same takeout I always did, let the dishes pile up, and ignored my therapist's texts. I told myself I was fine, but I wasn't. I was unraveling. One night, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, just staring at my reflection like I didn't recognize it. And I realized something. I had no photos. Not a single one. Nothing from childhood. No baby pictures. No awkward school portraits. No evidence that I even existed before age 18. I had scrubbed so hard to remove them from my life that I'd erased entire chapters of my own identity. And for what? To forget? To survive? Maybe. But in the process, I'd forgotten something else. Something bigger. Who I was without them. Not just the absence of abuse. Not just the freedom from judgment. But me. So I decided to find out. It started small. I pulled out an old spiral notebook and made a list. Not of goals. Just questions. Things I didn't know the answers to anymore. What kind of music do I actually like? What food do I eat when no one's watching? What would I do if I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone? What kind of man do I want to be? And the most terrifying one of all, what if I'm not broken? That question clung to me for days. So I started testing it. I changed my daily routine. Woke up an hour earlier. Walked instead of drove. Cooked a real meal instead of microwaving something in plastic. I turned on a playlist I didn't recognize and let it play through. Some of it I hated. Some of it, surprisingly, I didn't. Then I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I drew. Nothing fancy. Just sketches. Scribbles in a cheap sketch pad I picked up from the corner store. Faces. Hands. Shadows on walls. I didn't even know I remembered how. But the muscle memory came back like it had just been sleeping. It was the first time in years I felt present. The rise wasn't instant. It wasn't even steady. I had setbacks. Days I couldn't get out of bed. Days I drowned in flashbacks. Days I questioned everything again. But I kept going. Therapy helped. I finally texted my therapist back, and we started meeting twice a week. I told her about the letter, the will, the baby shower. She didn't judge. She didn't tell me what to do. She just listened and asked one question that shifted everything. If you weren't raised by your parents, what would you tell someone who was? That question messed me up for days. Because the answer was obvious. I'd tell them, you deserved better. And the moment I said those words out loud, to myself, in the mirror, quietly, like a secret, I cried harder than I had in years. Ugly, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I curled up on the floor and just let it happen. Because for the first time, I wasn't crying for what I'd lost. I was crying for me. The kid who'd been left at the mall. The boy who'd tucked his own birthday card into the trash so his parents wouldn't feel guilty. The teenager who flinched when someone raised their voice, even in a movie. I cried for all of them. And when I was done, I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and started again. Around that time, my job at the warehouse took a turn. One of the floor managers left unexpectedly, and they opened up applications internally. I didn't think I had a shot. I didn't have a college degree, just years of experience and a solid work ethic. But something in me said, try. So I did. I stayed up late reworking my resume. I asked a friend to help me practice interview questions. I went into that meeting with sweat on my palms and knots in my stomach, but I didn't downplay myself. I told the truth. I'd been with the company for almost a decade. I'd done every job on that floor. I knew how to fix broken systems, how to train new hires, how to keep morale up when half the staff wanted to quit. They gave me the job. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a corner office or a fat bonus, but it came with respect. And for once, I felt like I'd earned something that no one could take away. I bought myself a new desk chair, a ridiculous, expensive one, just because I wanted it. I laughed the whole way home, carrying it up the stairs. The promotion came with a small raise, too, enough to finally get out of the peeling paint apartment and into something a little nicer. I found a quiet place across town with hardwood floors, actual sunlight, and a little balcony. On moving day, I sat on a lawn chair out there, drank a cheap beer, and watched the sunset. It was the first time in years I felt peace. Not excitement, not happiness, just calm. That's when the emails started. First one was from Daisy. Short, too cheerful. Hey stranger, smiley face. Just wanted to say we really missed you at the shower. Mom was disappointed, but I'm still hoping you'll come visit soon. I'd love for you to meet the baby once he's here. XOD. I didn't respond. A week later, another one came. This time from my mom. Nathan, I don't know what's going on with you, but this behavior is very hurtful. Daisy is due soon, and this is not the time to hold grudges. We've all been through a lot. It's time to grow up. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a demand. It was like watching the same play I'd seen as a child. Same script. Different props. But I was done playing the extra. Then came the kicker. A voicemail from my dad. He hadn't called in years. Not once. But I guess old habits die hard. His voice was gravelly, clipped, like he was forcing himself to speak through gritted teeth. Nathan, I heard you got a promotion. Good for you. But don't let it go to your head. This family's been more than patient. If you don't want to be involved, fine. But don't come crawling back when things go south. You made your bed. I played it twice. Not because I needed to hear it. Just because I wanted to remind myself what his voice sounded like when it wasn't yelling. He still didn't get it. None of them did. They thought I was still that same kid, waiting outside the mall, clutching $5, hoping someone would come back. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I didn't respond. Not to the voicemail, not to the emails. I let the silence speak for me. Instead, I focused on what mattered. I kept working. I kept drawing. I made new friends. Real ones, not coworkers who just talked about the weather. I met a girl at an art supply store. Her name was Lena. She had paint on her fingers and tattoos of stars on her wrists, and she asked if I was an artist. I laughed and said no. She said I looked like one. We got coffee, then lunch, then dinner. She didn't ask about my past. She just asked what I liked to draw. No one had ever asked me that before. We weren't serious, not yet. But it felt real, like maybe something good could grow from all this. By the time Daisy's due date rolled around, I was fully expecting the pressure to ramp up. More letters, more guilt. But instead, everything went quiet. Until the final letter arrived. Not an email, not a voicemail. A real letter. Cream-colored paper. Expensive envelope. My name written in fountain pen. And when I opened it, my heart actually stopped. It wasn't from my parents. It was from Daisy. And what she wrote changed everything. Because it wasn't just an invitation. It was a request. A desperate one. And the secret she told me inside that letter? It shattered every assumption I'd ever had about my family. And it made me realize the real story hadn't even started yet. The letter from Daisy sat in my hands for nearly 20 minutes before I opened it. I knew it wasn't another guilt trip. It wasn't even on the same stationery my mother used. No scented perfume. No ivory cardstock. Just a plain white envelope with my name written in lowercase letters. Soft, uncertain pen strokes. Like she wasn't sure if she had the right to even address me. Inside, there were 2 sheets of paper. The first was a note. Rambling, emotional, raw in a way I hadn't seen from her since we were kids. The second was a photo, folded in half, and paper-clipped to a small post-it with just one word scribbled in Daisy's handwriting. Proof. The note wasn't long, but it was enough to shift everything. Nathan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I know I don't deserve your time. But I need you to read this, and I need you to believe me. I wasn't allowed to tell you before. They made sure of that. But now I'm scared. Not for me. For my son. I'm not asking you to forgive anyone. I'm not even asking you to come back. I just want you to understand what happened. Mom and Dad, they lied to you. About everything. About the night at the mall. About the group home. About why they stopped contacting you. It wasn't because you were the problem. It was because they wanted you gone. You were always too smart, too aware. You started asking questions. You noticed things. And that scared them. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I was just a kid, and I wanted to keep being the golden child. I didn't realize until I got older how badly they'd poisoned everything. They're not who they pretend to be. They're not safe. And now that I'm pregnant, I see it. I see what they're already doing. I can't protect my son from them on my own. Please, Nathan, I need your help. Daisy. I must have read it 10 times before I could breathe again. Then I unfolded the photo. It was blurry, a little grainy. Looked like it had been taken quickly, but I recognized what I was seeing. It was my parents' living room. Daisy must have snuck the photo with her phone. And in it, sitting on the coffee table, were 2 open folders, documents, forms, and a spreadsheet displayed on an iPad screen. A spreadsheet with my name on it. I squinted at the photo and could just make out the header of the document. Estrangement Strategy and PR Planning, Nathaniel C. My blood went cold. PR planning? They hadn't just cut me out. They'd planned for it, documented it, spreadsheeted it. And there, in the corner of the photo, was my mother, laughing. Everything snapped into focus. They didn't just want to erase me. They wanted to control the story of me. I sat there, back pressed against the kitchen cabinets, the letter in one hand and the photo in the other, and realized Daisy wasn't just reaching out. She was giving me a weapon. She was handing me the first domino. The rest? That would be up to me. I didn't act right away. I was careful. I spent the next few weeks building a plan. Quietly. Strategically. Revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was about clarity. Control. Making sure the truth hit exactly where it would hurt the most. The first step? Information. I needed to know exactly what my parents were hiding. So I called in a favor. Back when I worked those 2 jobs to survive, I befriended a guy named Marcus. Big dude. Former IT tech who fell into freelance cybersecurity work after getting blacklisted from a firm for refusing to scrub financial documents for a crooked CEO. Marcus didn't talk much, but he owed me. Years ago, I'd covered his rent for 2 months when he nearly got evicted. He answered on the second ring. Nate, he said. You're alive. Barely, I said. You still do recon? He snorted. What? Like digital stalking or moral gray area hacking? Both. Whose skeletons? My parents. That got his attention. I told him what I needed. Emails. Financial records. Social media accounts, public and private. Any cloud backups. I gave him names, dates, even the photo from Daisy to prove where to look. Marcus didn't ask questions. Just said, give me 2 weeks, and hung up. While I waited, I started working Daisy from the other side. Not manipulating. Collaborating. I sent her a text. Short and simple. Got your letter. I believe you. You in or out? She replied in under 5 minutes. In. What followed was a series of encrypted messages, secret phone calls, and shared Google Docs under fake names. We built a digital war room, collected timelines, documented lies, mapped out every manipulation we could remember. Daisy even snuck a few more photos from the house. One of them showed a document labeled Trust Access Strategy 2030. Another was a printed email from their lawyer outlining narrative control for when my father passed, with specific instructions on how to spin the family history for sympathy and maximize donations to a foundation I'd never heard of. They weren't just cutting me out. They were monetizing my absence. A week later, Marcus came through. He dropped everything into an encrypted folder labeled Ghost File. And what I found inside was worse than I expected. Bank statements that proved my parents had accessed a trust fund in my name, one I didn't even know existed. Apparently, my grandmother had set up accounts for both Daisy and me when we were born. But mine? Mine had been liquidated slowly, over several years, with educational expenses listed as the reason. I never went to college. Never got a cent. Then there were the emails. Hundreds of them. Between my parents and their lawyer. Between them and church board members. Between them and a handful of Daisy's momfluencer friends. They painted a very clear picture. I was the estranged black sheep. The rebellious addict. The one who abandoned the family after years of outbursts. One email from my mother to a church deacon even claimed I'd stolen money from them and disappeared. Another referred to me as a cautionary tale they planned to share at a youth parenting retreat. They were branding me. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling. I didn't feel sad. I felt ready. They'd written their story. It was time I wrote mine. Daisy and I got to work. The baby wasn't due for another month. That gave us just enough time to set the trap. She helped me draft a message, something simple, heartfelt, believable. An olive branch. We sent it to our parents through her email from her account. Said I wanted to make amends. Said I'd been going through therapy. Said I realized I overreacted and wanted to talk, really talk, before the baby came. They bought it instantly. Within 24 hours, I got a welcome back email from mom filled with emojis and false warmth, and a shorter, colder text from dad that just said, about time. We set the meeting for dinner. Neutral location. Public. Daisy's idea. She reserved a private room at a mid-tier Italian restaurant downtown. One they used to love because it made them feel cultured. I showed up early. Wore a clean button-down. Ordered sparkling water. Try not to throw up from the nerves. They walked in 10 minutes late. Mom was dressed like she was going to church. Dad looked like he always did. Pressed shirt, tense jaw, disapproving eyes. They sat. Didn't smile. Just waited. I took a breath and began. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I said. And I want to understand what happened. Between us. I want to hear your side. They lit up. My mother launched into a speech so rehearsed it could have won an Emmy. About how difficult I'd always been. How they tried their best. How they were only human. My dad nodded at all the right times, occasionally adding a comment like, you always pushed people away, or, you made your choices. I let them talk. For 22 minutes, I said nothing. Just nodded. Took notes on a pad I brought. Then I said, thank you. That helps. They smiled. And I smiled back. Because the mic in my breast pocket had picked up everything. After dinner, I texted Daisy one word. Got it. She replied with a thumbs up. Then sent the final piece of the plan. A group invitation link. To her baby's digital memory book. It looked sweet on the surface. Full of scanned ultrasound photos, journal entries, even short videos. But buried in the second-to-last tab was a video-marked message from my son. In it, Daisy spoke plainly. To her unborn child. About her past. About her brother. About the lies. It was raw, emotional, and devastating. She didn't name names, but she didn't have to. Anyone who knew the family would understand exactly who she meant. And at the end, she said, I want you to know that bravery doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's just telling the truth when no one wants to hear it. Then she added a password lock. She gave the password only to the people who mattered. Quietly. Selectively. Including a local journalist. And me? I had my own plan in motion. One involving their lawyer, their church board, their donors. And the trust fund they never thought I'd find out about. But this wasn't revenge yet. This was just the setup. The game board was in place. And my parents had no idea they were already checkmated. I had spent weeks preparing for the moment everything would snap into place, but when the day finally came, it felt almost quiet. Like the air itself was holding its breath. I wasn't the scared kid outside the mall anymore. I wasn't the invisible teenager tiptoeing around a house that only tolerated me. I was a grown man with evidence, allies, and a plan that had been stitched together with cold precision. The first blow didn't come from me. It came from the journalist. Daisy had given early access to the digital memory book to a handful of trusted people, former teachers, a couple of her childhood friends, and one local reporter who ran long-form community features about family dynamics, generational trauma, and occasionally, corruption. She didn't tell him anything outright. She just gave him the password and let him watch the video. He reached out to her the next day. Then he reached out to me. I invited him to my apartment. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, quiet but observant. He didn't interrupt once as I laid everything out, the abandonment, the group home, the will, the hidden trust fund, the spreadsheets mapping out my estrangement narrative. When I finished, he leaned back, stunned. Nathan, he said softly, these aren't mistakes. This is calculated. Exactly. He asked if I wanted to stay anonymous. I didn't hesitate. No, because the people who hid me didn't deserve the power of my silence anymore. He asked if I wanted revenge. No, I said. I want the truth. But the truth has a funny way of burning things down anyway. We spent 3 hours gathering the timeline. He photographed the documents, took screenshots, added the audio recording from the restaurant, the one where my parents admitted everything without realizing they'd walked right into my narrative trap. He asked permission to publish. I gave it. We agreed on a release date. 3 days later, the article went live. It was titled "The Son They Tried to Erase." It was long, painfully detailed, and beautifully written. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He just told the story exactly as it happened. My name, Daisy's letter, the photo evidence, the will, the spreadsheet, the trust fund theft, the emotional manipulation, the forced estrangement. He kept the most sensitive financial details anonymous at my request, but the core truth was unmistakable. And people noticed. Fast. Within hours, the comments were flooded. Parents, survivors of family estrangement, people who had been scapegoated by narcissistic relatives, all sharing their stories, all shocked by the methodical cruelty in the documents. The article was shared thousands of times within a day. A local radio host discussed it on air. Then a regional news station picked it up. Soon it spread beyond the state, beyond the region, into national threads on social media. My parents' church board saw it. Their neighbors saw it. Their lawyers saw it. And my parents, well, they saw it too. They called me. A dozen times. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages came quickly. First confusion, then fear, then anger. My mother's voice cracked with panic. Not for me. Never for me. But for her reputation. She kept saying, "This isn't fair," and "You should have talked to us," and "We could have settled this privately." Like the truth belonged to her. My father's messages were quieter, colder. "You've embarrassed us. You've ruined your sister's life. You don't understand what you've done." But he was wrong. I understood perfectly. And I wasn't done. Because the article had pushed the first domino, but the next ones were already lined up. The trust fund investigation began within a week. Marcus, the cybersecurity friend, had helped me gather everything we needed. Bank documents showing withdrawals from the account meant for my education, signatures that didn't match mine, emails from their lawyer strategizing how to justify draining my portion while preserving Daisy's. When I filed the report with the state's Financial Crimes Division, the officer reading it actually paused and said, "This is a lot." "Yes," I said. "Yes, it is." He took it seriously. More seriously than I expected. Maybe because the article was circulating. Maybe because the evidence was airtight. Maybe because people care more about stolen money than stolen childhoods. But for once, the system leaned in my direction. Within 10 days, my parents received official notice that they were under review. It wasn't an arrest. It wasn't charges. But it was a beginning. And that was enough. Meanwhile, Daisy was unraveling things from the inside. She moved out. Not dramatically. Not with screaming or ultimatums. She just left. Went to stay with a friend from her prenatal class. Told our parents that stress wasn't good for the baby. That she needed space. That she didn't trust them. My mother spiraled. My father grew silent. They didn't know that Daisy and I were meeting for lunch twice a week now. Sitting in parks. Talking about everything we never talked about growing up. She cried more than once. Quietly, apologetically. But I never asked her to stop. I wasn't angry at her. Not anymore. Anger requires intention. She had been a child too, shaped by the same people who shaped me. Just molded differently. Rewarded instead of punished. Worshipped instead of ignored. Raised to believe she was superior without ever being taught how to be kind. But adulthood had softened her. And motherhood terrified her. Not because of the baby, but because she finally understood the weight of raising a child and realized how badly ours had been raised. "I don't want him growing up like we did," she said one afternoon, hand on her stomach. "I don't want him thinking love is something you earn." I didn't know what to say, so I just put my hand over hers. That was the rise I never expected. Not a victory. A reconnection. A small, quiet reclaiming of something that wasn't dead after all. The final blow came when the church board called an emergency meeting. Someone on the board had seen the article. They demanded a review of my parents' leadership roles, because yes, they held positions there. Positions that gave them influence, credibility, and a stage from which they'd been preaching about family values for years. The board requested a copy of the will. Then the lawyer emails. Then the financial records. My parents refused. The board insisted. And suddenly, the cracks widened. They were quietly removed from their positions, pending investigation. The church newsletter, the one my mother practically lived for, announced new interim coordinators. My mother stopped calling me then, not out of acceptance, out of shock. She didn't understand how the story had slipped out of her hands. My father left one final voicemail. Not angry, not accusatory, just tired. You won, he said quietly. I hope you're satisfied. But he was wrong again. I hadn't won. I hadn't been trying to. This wasn't a battle for victory. This was a battle for truth. A battle to reclaim space in a story that was supposed to belong to me. And that battle, I had finished. Not triumphantly, not dramatically, just completely. 3 weeks later, Daisy went into labor. She didn't call our parents. She called me. I drove her to the hospital, stayed outside the delivery room, held her baby boy an hour after he was born. He had her nose and a tiny tuft of dark hair. She named him Jonah. When her friend came to visit, she asked who I was. Daisy smiled softly and said, "This is my brother, the one I told you about, the good one." I swallowed hard, didn't say anything, but in that moment, I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been knotted for 15 years. Not forgiveness, not healing, just release. The next morning, I got a final email from my mother. A short one, just 2 sentences. "We don't understand why you're doing this. Please don't contact us again." I read it once, then deleted it. She wanted the last word, but she didn't get it. Because this, the life I'd built, the truth that was out there, the family I chose to keep, that was my final word. And as I walked out of the hospital that morning, sunlight warming my face, I realized something simple and powerful. They hadn't abandoned me at 13. They'd freed me. They just didn't expect I'd learn how to live without them. But I did, and I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever.